We are going to start the program. Again, I think just to remind the speakers to come up, there are two speakers or microphones, there for you to use, and that is to make sure that the people that are at home get the message through, right? So I know it's a little bit weird to talk in because this room is so small too, so everyone here in the immediate room can hear. But just make sure that you talk into or stand right behind those two microphones. So before I introduce the first speaker, I would just like to contextualize and add a few definitions to the terms that we are really talking about today, which is migration and identity. So as we know, the topic of migration and identity is important to the well-being and success of the global community. We know that persons who move leave treasured communities behind, and we know that migration can result in hardship as well as growth on the individual level, but also as a positive impact on our global community. People are constantly moving across our borders, seeking a better future for themselves and their families. Some seek new opportunities because they are forced to migrate. Others move because of given opportunities. Despite any reasons for the decisions, the outcome of migration and identity stands central before us. The International Organization for Migration, IOM, defines a migrant as a person who moves away from their place of usual residence, whether within a country or across an international border, temporarily or permanently, and for a variety of reasons. Then again, identity, there are many different definitions of identity, but I would like to point out that identity is the qualities and beliefs, personality, looks, and expressions that make a person or a group and is formed within the culture in which you live. So, migrating people come from a diverse cultural backgrounds with already formed identities. So what then do we do when identities take place and move to a new place in terms of bringing their own identity as a resource and also creating new identities within their new cultures that they have moved to? How do we look at that as a really an asset in the world and the community of the global world that we're all a part of? To give you just a few statistics, the four most common types of migration: labor migration, 164 million in 2017. Forced migration or displacement, 70.8 million in 2018. Human trafficking and modern slavery, 25 million in 2016. Environmental migration, 17.2 million in 2018. And from the World Migration Report from the UN in 2020, just to give you a few numbers, estimated number of international migrants, in 2000 we had 150 million. In 2020 we have 272 million. Number of migrant workers, we don't have any numbers from 2020 or from 2000, but in 2020 we have 164 million people. Number of refugees, 14 million in 2000 and 25.9 million in 2020. Number of internally displaced persons, 21 million in 2000 and 41.3 million in 2020. So today we are going to discuss both great research that has been done on this topic of migration and identity. The program is indeed full of wisdom, research, and practical examples, both from Norway and the global stage. And we hope, of course, that you will enjoy today's sessions and speakers. I would like now to make sure that you also look at the bios, because my time up here is going to be little in terms of when I introduce speakers. There are bios where you can get more information about the speakers. The first session of the day is really going to work on or contextualize and talk about the high levels of academics. And the first person who is going to enter the stage is Dr. Kathrin Pabst. She's going to talk about identity on the line. So welcome so much to the podium, and we look forward to hearing your session.
Thank you very much, dear ambassadors, dear arrangators, this is not an English word, and dear all who are here. It's a pleasure to be the first speaker. Of course, welcome. Thank you for being here. It's a pleasure to talk to you today and to present a European project which is looking at the long-term consequences of migration. I just try to get it on. You can see here, I'm going to talk about what happens after migration processes. What does not only happen to the migrants themselves, but also to their children and grandchildren. And I'm going to talk mainly about forced migration and about trauma transfer. And firstly, I want to start introducing the project, because as I was introduced, it's an academic project, and we are involving 7 European countries. So, Identity on the Line, which is the name of the project, is a large-scale cooperation project between 7 European countries, 6 museums, cultural history museums, and 1 university. And we are actually all doing the same. We have interviewed former migrants and their kids and grandchildren and have looked at the long-term consequences of the different feelings, the different emotions, of course, the different happenings when you can't talk about them, how they affect you, even if you do not hear about them, you can feel them. So what is happening here? It's a 4-year project. Normally I move all the time, and I heard I'm not allowed to it, so I'm really trying hard to stand very still here. 4 years project, 2 years are finished already, and it's co-funded by Creative Europe, by the European Union. And led of my museum, the Vest-Agder Museum, I'm the project manager. I don't want to use time by this, but what we are doing is quite, I hope, good outcome. School packages, movies, 8 exhibitions, traveling through Europe. So we have quite some activities. I would like to start to introduce the 7 migration processes, because they are crucial for what I'm going to say, and you will see that there are very different migration processes. Here in Norway, we have worked on the long-term consequences of the Second World War. This is a temporary migration, we called it. You had almost 500,000 German soldiers have been here in Norway between 40 and 45, and during these 5 years they fall in love with Norwegian girls. They produce approximately 12,000 children. They have been cruel men, they have been good men, but they have been here and they affect Norway until today. I'm a German, as you can hear myself. I came with a lot of shame. I come back to that later. It's not about me, this lecture, of course, but I know quite some research from Germany as well. In Denmark, also one of our partner countries, we are working on the long-term consequences of the migration from Greenland to Denmark, which is still the Greenlandic people in Denmark are experiencing racism every day today. In Sweden, we are talking about the forced migration of Sami from the north to the south of Sweden 100 years ago. And today, 100 years later, the descendants of the people who came and the descendants of the people who have been there before do not speak the same language and don't speak with each other, mainly. Poland is working on the population exchange. The Germans had to leave Poland, as some areas of Poland, as you might know, and the Polish people who moved in the houses were always afraid the Germans would come back. It was quite tough in Lithuania, working with the long-term consequences of the Holocaust, and Slovenia and Croatia are related to the wars in the 90s. So, this is our material, and together, I just have to get it here. Where do I have to peek? Which direction do I have to lead? Is this direction? In sum, we have conducted 164 in-depth interviews between 3 and 15 hours long with the migrants themselves and their kids and grandchildren. And the process have been intense also for us talking to the people, because we have heard stories they have never shared before. So, please note, I'm going now to give you some examples, what I'm talking about, before summing up. And I start with very nice, peaceful quotes before I go over to some other quotes. You can just read the information down here while I just will read to you the main quote. This book is almost as old as I am. My mother took it with her in 1975 when she came to Slovenia, carrying me and one suitcase. I think that for my mother it represented a link to her home, because at that time women went in search of a way to earn their daily bread. My mother went alone and settled down here. What I remember most about those days is the smell of home-cooked food, chicken soup, wild cherry strudel, the smell of home, the smell of a time that has passed and will never come back. You can feel already, here was a lady traveling alone with her kid, and the kid could feel the sorry of her mother the rest of her life. Danish. Being Danish and a quarter Greenlandic is like putting together a confusing puzzle. The pieces do not fit together, and a number of pieces are missing, especially from the Greenlandic side. The challenge has been to create myself as a whole person with the pieces I have had available to me. That has created a whole, or a sense of want in my identity, which is about what my roots look like. And this I'm coming back again and again to. The third generation, the second and the third, if they don't, who are they? If they maybe don't know what has happened, or don't get the information, I come back to that. Or just who are they if they never had real roots? We stayed in Trieste, Italian city for those of you not familiar with the area. We stayed in Trieste for 3 days at the silos. We slept on the floor, right on the floor, without blankets, nothing, just like animals. You can imagine the pain my mother and my father experienced. It's about the feelings which still are there after so many years in the people who were young kids when this happened. And the last, before I sum up the first round, Slovenia, my new country, did not want me. Or, amid the uncertainty of a newly formed country, it did not wish me well. Years of complete uncertainty followed without any valid documents, no health insurance or social as well as physical security. Grey years, years of struggle, struggle for survival, struggle for identity. As I was losing battle after battle against the almighty bureaucracy, for 8 years, I was gaining strength, perseverance, love, empathy, softness, and the ability to forgive. If I sum up all the 164 interviews which we have heard, we have seen, the partners and I, we have found common traits in all interviews. And these common traits are ongoing attempts to find one's own identity somewhere between the following poles: home and away, belonging and alienation, silence and openness, resilience and vulnerability, injustice and reconciliation. And each of the 168 people we talked to would place themselves somewhere on these lines. Of course, everyone at a different place. I would like to use some minutes to go a little bit deeper into this aspect. I could go into every aspect. I take this one. I chose it because it's related to Norway and the descendants we talked to from the Norwegian, or from the time where the Germans were here during the war. And it is also related to the Holocaust because, as I told you, in Lithuania, one of my colleagues is working with the Holocaust survivors and their kids and grandchildren. 3 more quotes for you, and then it's enough quotes. It's about silence and openness, and especially silence. If you don't know what happened, if you don't get the information, you need to find your own identity. Did mother talk about the war? No, we both never spoke about the war. Then we were together and we never spoke about the war. My granddaughter used to push me. Tell. No, I didn't say anything terrible. I only used to tell just a little bit. I wanted to forget, just delete everything. This is already in the core of what we found, that there is something happening between these generations. If the first generation experienced something really traumatic during the migration process, they couldn't or wouldn't talk about it. Maybe it was too traumatic. Maybe it was just something they did and they felt ashamed about it. The kids accepted the silence. They suffered and they reacted, but they accepted. Not the third generation. They ask questions because they have a distance. They are looking for answers, and sometimes they don't get it, and they suffer with it their whole life. One more. When did your children ask questioning you? It is already a slightly painful question in the sense that I didn't tell them anything. My children didn't ask me. Now, as it's in the last years when the Jewish community emerged during the years of independence, this topic started to be spoken about more. When they told me some years ago that they had felt the pressure all the time, I said to them, I didn't say anything to you. I didn't tell you stories. No, you didn't tell us, but we felt it. That's the point. We felt it. When we worked on the Norwegian sub-project, we were contacted by a German lady who, I didn't know it, even if I'm a German, of course I didn't know her. She said, my father was stationed in Norway during the Second World War, and he came back deeply traumatized, most certainly because he had to do something. Okay, he did something. This was a guy who did something, but he came back very traumatized, as she said. Something terrible happened in Norway during the war. Something terrible that was going to leave its marks on my father more than anything else. Something so strong that he was never willing to talk about it. Something that traumatized him so profoundly that it affected our entire family, even us 4 siblings who have never experienced the war. In this way, the war somehow became part of our lives too. This guy, this man who was stationed in Norway during the Second World War, built a Norwegian cabin somewhere in the woods in the south of Germany. And that was the only place where he could smile, but he could never talk about what has happened. And the last one, this is the kid of a German soldier. From my early childhood, I was instructed not to tell anyone that I came from Germany. In the aftermath of the war, I understood that these cover stories were good for me. I had friends who did not have such cover stories and who ended their lives as adults, shooting themselves because they couldn't cope with it anymore. And I just want to mention here already, unfortunately, I don't have time to talk about it, but the local societies where this happened was extremely important. If the local society was supporting, and they could support the mothers who fall in love with the German soldiers and the kids, it went well. If we are in big cities where the society supported the punishment of the traitors, it went really well. It went really bad for several of them. I just want to slightly say why this is important for museums and cultural institutions. It is because you never know what is inside of a person, and the person itself often does not know which feelings are hidden there, because there is something happening between the generations you are not aware of. I'm a 3rd generation myself. I was not aware of anything. I know now I'm a kid of a migrant myself. Now nobody ever talked about it. I have it in my body. I have everything still in my body, and research proves it. I can come back to that. But what I first want to mention is the traumatic memories and how trauma can be transferred from one generation to the others. Do I still have 5 minutes or something like that? You think so, okay. Otherwise you have to stop me. You have my watch, so you have to tell me when it's... So I want to talk about the transfer of traumatic memories, and of course I can't go really deep into the research here and now, but I just want to mention some of the aspects. Trauma can, of course, happen in all kinds of circumstances. Now I relate it to migration. It could happen to anyone. Every accident could lead to a trauma. Everything which threatens your life. It's an emotional response to a terrible event like an accident, rape, or natural disaster. Immediately after the event, shock and denial are typical. Longer-term reactions include unpredictable emotions, flashbacks, strained relationships, and even physical symptoms like headache or nausea. There are very clear segments of trauma. I don't go into that. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not someone working with this normally. I'm just an ethnologist and a historian. And I think museums and cultural institutions are underestimating how big the importance of trauma is, which you might have in your families, but never talked about. And suddenly you are triggered by something you see in a museum, you hear at a conference, you experience somewhere, and you react in a way which is not clear for you yourself, how you react and why you react like that. So There is now we just got financed, the Art Council Norway have just financed additional research project to look a little bit closer into these theories. I haven't done so yet, I just mentioning it. We will do so, because what we found when we were working on the 164 interviews, that there are theories which might explain why the third generation, as myself, still can feel and sense something, and they ask questions, they don't get answers necessarily, but they have something in their body which they can't understand. Why? How is this possible? How is biology working? I have no idea, but we started to try to look into theories. And there are 3 ways, according to epigenetic experts, there are 3 ways how a trauma could be transferred from one generation to the second to the third. The one is, of course, that you have a mother or a father who is acting in a certain way while you are growing up. So you have always felt that there is something because your father or mother is acting in a way which seemed a little bit not appropriate to what you experienced then and there. So there is a kind of behavior which is important. Then, while you're in the womb of your mother, you can, of course, biology tells stress feeling could be transferred. But then, and that is quite new, in addition, we know today that even if the genetic material is, of course, the same. When you're born, you get a genetic material and you keep it the rest of your life. But what epigenetics have found out the last years and finding out more about all the time, while we speak actually, is that when someone experienced extreme stress due to a trauma, there is a kind of marker. I would call it marker now, and I'm no biologist, so excuse my not being 100% accurate, but there is a kind of marker which can, in the minutes or when the trauma happens, influences or just puts on the genetic material, and this marker, which is a stress marker, here something happens, you have to react, your body has to react, you have to prepare. This marker can be transferred to the generations to come. And thereby, a third generation could react in a totally unlogical way to something the first generation has experienced. In Germany, since 20 years, for example, around about, more and more people, grandchildren and children of the soldiers who still feel shame, but also the people, migrants in Germany, as you might know, there was a big migration process in the end, forced migration in the end of 45. 14 million Germans had to leave the one part of Germany, move to the others. Germany is full of people who still experience, for example, my generation, that there a fear of don't get enough food, a fear of not being able to secure your life, all these kind of things which are totally not rational. And there is some research going on that this is due to these kind of findings. So thank you very much. I think I stop here. I had to stand still, so it might not have been so energetic, but thank you very much for you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pabst. And I'm wondering too, and maybe this is a question for later, but I think a lot of the research that will be delivered and shared with us today is research that we might want to read. So maybe we could, on the Thor Heyerdahl website, put out links to maybe more of the research so we can read more about it. Thank you so much.